Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about Catholicism, the Freemasons, and one of the greatest trolls in history. And no, this isn't an anti-religious video or another conspiracy expose. This is the story of one of the most brilliant pranksters humanity has ever produced. And trust me, it's absolutely fascinating. Finding reliable information on this topic wasn't easy, so make sure you watch until the very end. The biggest twist comes at the end of the story, but to understand it, we first need to travel back to 19th century France. Let's begin. Meet Gabriel Antoine Joguin-Pages, an ordinary French boy born in 1854. At the age of 5, he was sent to study at a Jesuit school. What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, quite a lot. Instead of becoming a devout Catholic, young Gabriel graduated as a convinced atheist and almost immediately began working for an anti-clerical newspaper. Keep in mind that this was the 19th century. At the time, the church still held enormous political influence, and criticizing religion publicly was far riskier than it is today. But Gabriel loved controversy far more than he valued playing it safe. Even by modern standards, many of his pranks would be considered outrageous. Back then, they were almost unthinkable. As a teenager, he sent a fake letter to the city authorities of Marseille claiming that the harbor had become infested with dangerous sharks. The officials believed him. They actually dispatched a ship and hundreds of sailors to hunt down the imaginary predators. Not long afterward, he moved to Switzerland, where he started spreading rumors about an ancient Roman city supposedly lying beneath the waters of Lake Geneva. The story spread so widely that tourists and even archaeologists began flocking to the lake in search of the lost ruins. But those were just harmless warm-up acts. His real target, the one that would define the rest of his life, was the Catholic Church. And now it's time to reveal the name by which history remembers him. Very few people know him as Gabriel Antoine Joguin-Pages. The world knows him as Leo Taxil. That was the pen name he adopted when he began publishing anti-religious pamphlets. In the former Soviet Union, Taxil is best known as the author of The Amusing Bible and The Amusing Gospel. These were among the first atheist books written for a mass audience, which is one of the reasons they were republished so many times during the Soviet era, where state atheism was official policy. The books didn't offer serious theological criticism or scholarly analysis. Instead, Taxil mocked biblical stories, poked fun at their contradictions, and treated religion with the same irreverence a stand-up comedian might bring to the stage. And that's exactly what made them so unusual. But don't imagine that Taxil was some kind of serious scholar or philosopher. He wasn't. He was essentially doing stand-up comedy on paper, and, surprisingly, many of his jokes are still entertaining today. What's even funnier, though, is how some modern clergymen still react to his books. Whenever they criticize Taxil, they almost always point out that his works aren't scholarly, that his understanding of scripture is inaccurate, and that his commentary is biased and unprofessional. Which is a rather strange criticism. Complaining that a joke isn't a scientific paper is, in itself, pretty funny. The real value of Taxil's books wasn't in their historical accuracy or theological arguments. It was that, perhaps for the first time, someone openly dared to ridicule not just the church, but religion itself. That said, don't mistake Taxil for some enlightened champion of reason. As I mentioned earlier, he was, above all else, a troll, and an exceptionally dedicated one. The Amusing Bible wasn't even his first book. Before that, he wrote more traditional anti-clerical works exposing the alleged corruption of priests and church officials. There was just one problem. Taxil had absolutely no problem making things up. His stories were filled with lurid tales of secret affairs, drunkenness, political conspiracies, and every imaginable scandal. Some stories were borrowed from other anti-clerical writers. Others came from rumors, and many were simply products of his own imagination. Because, why not? If it made the story more entertaining, that was good enough for him. Eventually, however, his luck nearly ran out. In 1879, Taxil published his first major bestseller, The Secret History of the Holy See, a book recounting the colorful and often scandalous lives of the popes throughout history. His subtitle left absolutely no room for subtlety. Lies, betrayal, murder, greed, and debauchery. These are the true deeds of those who proclaimed themselves God's representatives on earth while preaching patience, humility, and virtue. How much of the book was true and how much was pure fiction is difficult to say. But one thing is certain: the Catholic Church was furious. Even the Pope himself took notice. Copies of the book were publicly burned. Priests denounced Taxil from the pulpit. He received countless threats and curses. Eventually, he was even taken to court on charges of insulting religion. To everyone's surprise, he won. France was changing. The secular movement had become strong enough that people could no longer be convicted simply for blasphemy. For Taxil, this victory wasn't a warning. It was an invitation, and from that moment on, he became even bolder. One after another, he published books with titles like The Love Affairs of Pope Pius IX, Pope Leo XIII, The Poisoner, and many more in the same spirit. He also founded France's first anti-clerical bookstore and later established the Anti-Clerical League, which attracted around 17,000 members within just a few years. It was during this period that Taxil created his first truly elaborate hoax. A novel titled The Secret Love of Pius IX appeared under the name of Karl Volpe, supposedly the former personal valet of the Pope. Except, there was no Karl Volpe. The entire memoir had been written by Taxil himself. Like his earlier works, the book overflowed with stories about the Pope's alleged lovers, secret affairs, and the scandalous private lives of high-ranking clergymen. But this time, Taxil had crossed a new line. He wasn't simply writing satire anymore. He was presenting pure fiction as the testimony of a real eyewitness. The late Pope's nephew sued him for defamation. And unlike the previous trial, Taxil lost. He was ordered to pay a substantial fine. Most people would probably have learned their lesson. Taxil wasn't most people. If anything, getting into trouble only seemed to encourage him. Soon afterward, he mailed another one of his books directly to the Pope himself, along with a message wishing for the swift downfall of the Catholic Church. Needless to say, the Vatican was not amused. Taxil was officially excommunicated, although, considering everything he'd done up to that point, it's honestly surprising it hadn't happened much earlier. But now we finally arrive at the most fascinating part of the story. If Leo Taxil had been nothing more than an anti-clerical journalist, he probably wouldn't be remembered today. Yes, in Russia he's mostly known for the amusing Bible, but across Europe, he's remembered for pulling off one of the longest and most astonishing hoaxes in modern history. And here's how it all began. While Leo Taxil was relentlessly attacking the Catholic Church with one outrageous story after another, the Catholic Church had its own enemy, the Freemasons. Throughout much of the 19th century, many Catholic leaders viewed Freemasonry as one of the greatest threats to Christianity. Then one day, Pope Leo XIII, the very same pope to whom Taxil had once sent a book wishing for the Church's downfall, published another fierce condemnation of the Masons. And that's when something completely unexpected happened. Taxil publicly announced that he had seen the error of his ways. He humbly begged the Church for forgiveness. He renounced his previous books. He declared that he deeply regretted attacking Catholicism. And, most importantly, he claimed he had finally realized the true danger facing Christianity: the Freemasons. He promised to dedicate the rest of his life to exposing their dark secrets. No one saw this coming. The Catholics were shocked. His friends in the Anti-Clerical League were just as stunned. Could Taxil really have changed? Apparently, he was serious enough to travel to Rome in person. He was granted an audience with the Pope himself. Leo XIII became convinced that Taxil's conversion was genuine and welcomed him back into the Church. Before long, Taxil was working with the blessing of the very institution he had spent years mocking. Just 1 year later, he published a new book titled The Mysteries of Freemasonry. His writing style hadn't changed at all. Only the target had. Instead of accusing priests of corruption, he was now accusing the Freemasons. His books described horrifying satanic rituals, secret orgies, conversations with Lucifer himself, and elaborate conspiracies to seize control of governments across the globe. Readers couldn't get enough. The book became a massive success. Almost overnight, Taxil transformed from a controversial journalist into a wealthy best-selling author. Even more remarkably, he became a respected guest within influential Catholic circles. His former allies, however, were horrified. The anti-clerical league expelled him, accusing him of betraying everything he had once stood for. Taxil brushed off the criticism with a smile. According to him, anyone attacking his books was probably a Freemason trying to silence the truth. And so he kept publishing. Each new book contained even more shocking revelations than the last. Readers learned astonishing new facts about the secret world of Freemasonry. Ironically, some of Taxil's harshest critics weren't atheists or secular intellectuals. They were anti-Masonic writers. One of the best-known opponents of Freemasonry at the time, Abel Clarin de la Rive, with some sources also mentioning Paul Rosen, publicly dismantled Taxil's claims, pointing out countless contradictions and factual errors. Taxil's response? Simple. He declared that his critic was secretly a Freemason. Not just any Freemason, in fact, a close associate of the Grand Master himself, desperately trying to destroy the reputation of an honest man. It was a ridiculous accusation, yet many people believed it, but Taxil wasn't finished. Soon, he introduced an even darker secret. He claimed that ordinary Freemasons knew nothing about the organization's true purpose. Hidden within it, he said, was an elite inner order known as the Paladists. Only the highest-ranking initiates supposedly belonged to this secret society. And unlike ordinary Masons, the Paladists openly worshipped Satan. Taxil described blasphemous ceremonies in vivid detail. He claimed that members mocked Christ, drank blood during their rituals, and even held conversations with the devil himself. Naturally, people began asking the obvious question: where was all this information coming from? Taxil had an answer. He claimed to have an insider. Her name was Diana Vaughn. According to Taxil, she was the daughter of a high-ranking satanic Freemason. Raised from childhood in devil worship, she allegedly became the chosen bride of the demon Asmodeus. And where did the happy couple supposedly spend their honeymoon? On Mars. Yes, Mars. But after witnessing the horrors of Satanism, Diana supposedly repented, converted to Catholicism, and began helping Taxil expose the Freemasons from the inside. Convenient, isn't it? Are you still following the story? Because by 1896, Taxil's books had become so unbelievably absurd that even modern conspiracy television would have struggled to keep a straight face. By this point, even many of Taxil's allies within the anti-Masonic movement had started to suspect that he had completely lost his mind. The breaking point came during an anti-Masonic conference. Several prominent attendees demanded that Taxil finally provide proof that Diana Vaughn was a real person, and not simply another one of his inventions. Taxil agreed. He announced that on April 19, 1897, he would introduce Diana Vaughn to the public during a grand event at the Hall of the Geographical Society in Paris. The announcement caused a sensation. Theologians, journalists, writers, curious spectators, supporters, critics, practically all of Paris wanted to witness the first public appearance of the mysterious woman whose testimony had supposedly exposed the darkest secrets of Freemasonry. Before the event, Taxil even traveled to Rome one last time. Once again, he met with the Pope. Once again, he received the Church's blessing. Everything was perfectly in place. Then, the appointed day arrived. The auditorium was packed. Everyone waited eagerly for Diana Vaughn to step onto the stage. Instead, Leo Taxil walked out, alone. He looked at the audience, paused for a moment, and calmly announced, "There is no order of the Paladists. There never was. And every single one of my anti-Masonic books, from the first page to the last, is complete fiction. Only fools could possibly have believed them, or priests, which, as far as I'm concerned, is basically the same thing. And Diana Vaughn? She never existed either. The name belonged to his typist, the woman who had helped him prepare his manuscripts." Then Taxil explained what he had actually been doing all those years. The Pope encouraged everyone to expose the Freemasons. Instead, I exposed Catholic ignorance, superstition, and gullibility. I proved that the Pope and the highest officials of the Church were willing to believe the most ridiculous nonsense. Remember how the Church once accused me of spreading lies? Well, that very same church eagerly embraced equally ridiculous lies, as long as they were directed against its enemies. The hall erupted. To call it a scandal would be a massive understatement. Many people were so furious that they were ready to attack Taxil on the spot. Fortunately for him, he had anticipated exactly that. Before the lecture began, he had politely asked everyone to leave their walking sticks and umbrellas in the cloakroom. Even so, staying around any longer was probably a bad idea. Taxil fled the building before the enraged crowd could get their hands on him. But from his point of view, the prank had been a complete success. Now here's the truly unbelievable part. How long do you think this hoax lasted? A year? 2 years? 5? No. Leo Taxil successfully pretended to be a devout Catholic and passionate anti-Masonic crusader for 12 years. Naturally, no one was more outraged than Pope Leo XIII. Again, after all, this was the same man who had first excommunicated Taxil, then forgiven him, welcomed him back into the church, trusted him, and publicly supported his work, only to discover that the entire thing had been an elaborate practical joke. Needless to say, Taxil was excommunicated once more. This time, just to be safe, he was also formally anathematized. Taxil simply laughed. Then he went back to writing anti-religious books as though nothing had happened. But here's the fascinating part. According to Taxil himself, he never expected the hoax to last anywhere near 12 years. Think about it. An outspoken enemy of the church suddenly announces a miraculous conversion. He requests a private audience with the Pope. He starts publishing books that are written in exactly the same sensational style as his old anti-Catholic works. Only now the villains have changed. Who could possibly take that seriously? And yet, almost everyone did. Only a handful of Taxil's closest collaborators knew the truth. Together, they sat around inventing increasingly ridiculous facts about the Freemasons. And yes, virtually all of those shocking revelations came entirely from Taxil's imagination. The funniest part? He wasn't even trying very hard to hide it. With every new book, Taxil pushed the absurdity even further. It was almost as if he were conducting an experiment to find out just how much nonsense people were willing to believe. Years later, he described his writing process like this. Whenever I invented stories about the devil turning into a beautiful young woman in the morning, dreaming of marrying a Freemason, only to transform into a crocodile playing the piano by evening, my assistants would burst into laughter and tell me, "You've gone too far this time. This will ruin the whole joke." And I would simply reply, "No, they'll believe it." And they did. Looking back, it's entirely possible that Taxil could have spent the rest of his life making a fortune from anti-Masonic books. In fact, he had already become quite wealthy because of them. But there was one important difference between Taxil and an ordinary con artist. Money was never his main goal. He was a mystifier, a prankster on an almost unimaginable scale. If pulling off the perfect joke required sacrificing 12 years of his life, losing old friends, pretending to admire people he couldn't stand, and earning the trust of those he intended to fool, then, in Taxil's mind, it was absolutely worth it. Still, it's important not to romanticize him. Leo Taxil was not a philosopher. He was not a historian. And he certainly wasn't a champion of truth. He was, first and foremost, a liar. He used deception without hesitation because, in his eyes, it was simply the most effective tool for achieving his goals and entertaining himself along the way. Unsurprisingly, not everyone appreciated that approach. Many secular thinkers and rationalists criticized Taxil for filling his earlier books with fabricated stories. They believed religion should be challenged with evidence, logic, and honesty, not lies. Taxil completely disagreed. His response was essentially this: any method is justified when fighting religion and its servants. Clericalism is an enemy that must be defeated by every possible means. God is evil. Therefore, anything that turns people away from God is, by definition, moral. There can be no such thing as dishonest irreligion. If a lie harms religion or the clergy, then that lie is perfectly legitimate. Is that a reasonable position? Personally, I don't think so, but Taxil probably wouldn't have cared what any of us thought. That was never his talent. His true gift was something else entirely. He possessed an almost supernatural ability to provoke people, to make them angry, to expose their gullibility, to force them to reveal just how badly they wanted to believe what they already believed. A quote that perfectly captures his life goes something like this: "I discovered that I have only one real talent, but it's a remarkable one. I know how to make fools furious. I doubt anyone alive can compete with me in that. And honestly, that isn't nearly as easy as it sounds. Try pretending to hold the exact opposite beliefs from your own. Not for a day, not for a week, but for an entire year. Now imagine keeping that performance going for 12 years without exposing yourself." That's exactly what Leo Taxil accomplished. What's even more remarkable is that many of the myths he invented still survive today. Stories he made up over a century ago continue to appear in documentaries, books, websites, and conspiracy theories about the Freemasons. His greatest trick wasn't fooling the church. It was proving how easily people can convince themselves of almost anything, provided it confirms what they already want to believe. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, don't forget to check out my previous video about Nikola Tesla. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what historical story you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.